Hey AP, sorry this video is kind of late. Apologize, I've been having struggles. um, so we're gonna look at section 6.13 and 6.14 today for Caesar's Gallic War, and this kind of section, this section of book six. It's pretty interesting because it gives a little more in-depth look at some of the Gallic customs and rituals, which is a kind of a really interesting feature of Caesar's telling of the Gallic Wars. It's not all just like a, you know, tale of battles and all that sort of thing. He really does take interest and study the people that he is conquering. um, so 6.13, we learned that there are two kind of basic divisions of the Gallic people, at least those that have power. He says that are of any number and distinction. So the two groups are the Druids, and then the other group is the knights or the cavalry. And then you've got the plebes. He mentions them. They have basically no authority, no voice. They are essentially slaves, and he kind of goes on that very beginning part, talking about how they'll kind of basically sell themselves into slavery because they have no other recourse. Um, so very kind of sad plight of those people. All right. But then the kind of the remainder of 613, which is a bit of a longer section, he goes in and talks about some of the um, responsibilities and practices and all that of the Druids. Okay, so we learned that they're in charge of sacrifices and taking part in divine ritual and interpreting religious rites and everything. Um, and we also learn that they have there are a lot of children that go and study with them, and the Druids are held in very high regard and in great honor. Um, and then we learn they decide on matters and controversies and everything, both public and private. And if there are disputes about inheritance or about boundaries, they decide on those things. They issue judgment if there's a crime that's been committed. Um, and then people that don't abide by their decrees, they are basically excluded from the Gallic cult, more or less. So they are not allowed to participate in sacrifices and everything, and they're basically ostracized from the Gallic cult, which is for them a very very severe punishment, to be kind of like outside of the community, basically. Um, all right, and then we learn that he kind of goes in a little bit more and talks about um, what's like for those people that do kind of disobey the Druids' commands, and how they are kind of shunned and everything. Then he talks a little bit about succession among the Druids. So um, there's basically like one kind of very high-ranking Druid, and then if he dies, sometimes someone that's very well respected, who excels um, in merit or in dignity, he will succeed him, or sometimes if there are a lot of equals, he talks about how the other druids will either vote on it, or sometimes even kind of resort to a contest of arms, which is a little bit a little bit surprising from what we know. And then he kind of ends section 613 here, talking about how they will kind of come together in a central location in the boundaries of the Carnutes, which is kind of apparently they consider it fairly centrally located in Gaul, and they basically have this little this little powwow, kind of like a high assembly or something like that, and then he says that a lot of these things they've kind of brought over from Britain, and then some of the really diligent and really people that want to further their learning will go to Britain to study. So that's kind of how he ends 613. And a couple things. There's definitely some similarities and everything between the Gallic culture and the Roman, but there's also some very significant differences as well. The Romans were also a very religious people, but they did not have a kind of class of priests that had the same type of authority that the Druids had. Because you can see the Druids have this kind of religious authority, but they also have they have a legal authority as well, not just a moral authority. And they also have this kind of educational authority too. They basically are the education system. So if you have time and interest, it would be a very interesting kind of comparison to go and look up some details about Roman education, and also Roman religion as well. So the Roman priest, the highest kind of position in the Roman priest was what's called the Pontifex Maximus. It's a term you may have heard before. So Pontifex is your kind of your term for priest, and then Maximus would be like the greatest priest. And this was a very high-ranking position in Roman in the Roman religion, and they also had a great deal of moral authority, and with the Romans too, it was always intimately connected with the state as well. So it wasn't just like there was no separation of church and state. That was not a thing. And this was a position that actually Caesar himself held, and position of great moral responsibility, and but it was very, very different from what he describes here as what the Druids had. All right. The Romans, the Roman priests and everything did not have like authority over someone's life and death. They did not have that kind of purview, I guess you could say. So that would be an interesting comparison if you have time and are able to look up some details on that. So the Romans also had other types of priests too. So you had the Pontifex Maximus was the highest, but they also had several different categories. Flamen is kind of another kind of term for a priest, and they had various kind of colleges, I guess you could say, of I think the plural is Flaminia, but I'm not sure. But Flamen Dialis is one really common one as well. Okay, 614, this kind of really looks into some of the educational systems of the Druids, and some also of their kind of the privileges that they had. So they don't have to, they're basically exempt from war, from taxes, um, and from other types of kind of public service. So that kind of makes it a very appealing position to to a lot of people, and parents and neighbors will try to, they'll try to send their kids to get educated by the Druids, and sometimes this can be a very long process. So line 6 of 614 says, sometimes for 20 years, they'll be in the Druids kind of tutelage. All right. And then there's this really interesting section about how the Druids really rely on their memory for education, and don't put things down into writing, because they think it will weaken their power of memory. So there's that, and they also don't want it to be kind of conveyed to the public as well. So that if they write it down, they think that it'll be more easily disseminated among the kind of the common folk, and they don't want that to happen. All right, and Caesar does, like himself. You can see at the I guess it's lines 11, 12, 13. He does recognize that, hey, that is true when we do commit things to writing. It does mean that we don't have to be as diligent in memorizing and everything, because we can just go read it somewhere. So there are definitely positives and drawbacks, I'd say, if you're kind of considering, like, is committing things to memory, is it that important, or should we just be able to go look up everything? And it's kind of something to ponder and think about. Although he does also make this concession that the Gauls do use Greek letters, but those are usually more in different kind of public and private affairs. They're not really in their educational system. All right. Then he talks about the end of 614. He has this little section on kind of the transmigration of souls. So how spirits will pass from one body to another, and they use this kind of teaching to help their people not fear death, because their spirit is just going to kind of go on to another body later. So there's no reason to fear death. So that's a kind of an interesting teaching that they present to their people. All right, and then he kind of ends the section how they dispute and hand down many things about stars or constellations and their movements, the size of the universe and of lands, nature of things, strength and power of the immortal gods. All right. So the Druids, you can see that they really are a very, very, they have power over like moral issues. They have power over legal issues. They have power over educational issues. So they really are a huge part of the Gallic society. So it's an interesting kind of study in the people that Caesar is conquering. All right, so and also, again, another kind of interesting thing is if you have time and interest, to kind of go look up some aspects of Roman education, and you can find that stuff pretty readily online if you have time and interest, and kind of compare that to some of the things that Caesar presents here as far as the Gallic education goes. All right, so I'll have some questions up for you on LMS about the 613, 614, just some grammar questions as you're reviewing. Let me know if you have any questions on grammar or social details or anything like that from the text or anything like that. Let me know, because I know there's not covering everything in these videos, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And for tomorrow, we'll do 6:15 through 6:17. Okay, so we'll do those 3 sections for tomorrow. All right, love you guys, and talk to you later.